We're recording.
Okay, thank you very much. We're now at that point on the afternoon of day 4 where we had council's verbal right of reply. I haven't got many questions for you that I haven't already put. Do you have any questions, Councillor? Otherwise, we'll let you lead off with your summary and then maybe there might be some questions.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Similarly, the nature of these hearings are that it's perhaps a tale of two separate engagements, those who have taken minute 14 and those that have not. But that certainly does not preclude them from further consideration. Well, Mr. Chair, I think we probably similarly don't have a huge amount to talk through. I would probably ask in turn Ms. Pearson and Ms. Trinder to talk to you about things that they perhaps want some clarification on, perhaps would like to provide. I might start with Ms. Pearson.
Absolutely. I just thought I'd start with a couple of things from earlier in the week. Start with, I will look at the mapping of 115 State Highway 12 in Okanoni. It has been missed off. I would get that mapping eventually and get that included. With respect to Mr. Carr and his request for more settlement land in Okaihau, really regret not being able to have a pre-hearing meeting with Mr. Carr, as I think we would have been able to probably present you with a more unified position, and we may have got some agreement. But I do think there is a solution there for settlement zoning, particularly with the additional rebuttal information that he provided after my 42A report. I think there is a bit of a question about exactly where that zone boundary lies, and I can think of a couple of different reasons for it being at the top of the ridge or at the bottom. But based on what I heard at the hearing, there are potentially arguments for both, but I suspect that there may be more clarity once the panel's undertaken the site visit tomorrow, and I think we take direction on that once you've been out to site. Which segued nicely into site visits. I know earlier in the week you asked me, is there anything in particular that you would like me to tell you to have a look at while you're out doing your site visits? First off, I agree with the list of sites that you've identified as the ones that you are going to visit. I think they're the ones that I would have been signalling you to visit regardless, but you come to that conclusion on your own. I also think that from the nature of the questions and issues discussed this week, you'll probably be focusing on the right aspects of what you need to look at without any further direction from me. The only exception to that, just to give you some context as to where my thinking has moved to on Tubbs Farm, I did offer the same pre-hearing engagement to the Kerikeri Conservation Trusts. They did actually signal that they wanted to opt in, but they didn't take me up on that. It might have been comfortable to have talked to them as well as Mr. Brown and Co. before we got to this hearing. But the evidence I heard from Vision Kerikeri this week and the others did make me take a second look at that eastern part of the rezoning, and the sizes of sites across that area, they're not homogenous. They're sort of grade, quite small in the west, the most recently presented ones, and there are some larger lots out on the coast. And
excuse me, these are the lots that have already been formed.
Yep.
And we visited those.
So my discussion with Mr. Brown in terms of really drilling down into what the controls were on the subdivision, they really did again focus on that western half rather than the eastern half. Mr. Brown wasn't as familiar with the consenting conditions and the details of those first early stages, and they've obviously all been all sold now. I think there's a Burnbird Road, which you probably drove up yesterday. For me, there's been a lot of talk this week about defensible boundaries. That seems to be one of the lines where it starts to shift the nature and intensity of those lots, with the ones to the east of that being those slightly bigger ones that admittedly do have, if you're looking at subdivision risk, those would be the ones that have got the largest risk. I'm much more comfortable that the ones to the west of Burnbird Road have got much less subdivision risk as per my 42A report. I still maintain my position that I don't think there's a control pathway for any of the lots. However, I am mindful of the comments I made in relation to Mr. Palmer's land, where I noted in the week that the zoning sets the baseline, the starting point for how many lots are anticipated. And then you get the overlays coming over the top that reduce that potential from there, but the zoning is your starting point for what the plan anticipates. So potentially, I know you've already visited the Tubbs farmland, but when you think about what you saw on your site visit, there could be further thought as to whether rural residential zoning is the best zoning, actually the best zoning for the eastern portion of the land. I will be putting my mind to that in my right of reply. But I am actively thinking about that eastern side.
So what we were thinking about, so what we were looking at is where building sites are and how where houses have been built and what the consequences are. It's not as, it looks to us that it would be quite hard to chisel off a complying lot without destroying the dwelling that was already there. You're obviously aware of that too.
I am, and that is why I came to the original conclusion of my Section 42A report that it would be difficult. I guess I was acknowledging not impossible, and that discretionary pathways are open to people. I think that the likelihood of subdivision probably lies somewhere between Mr. Brown's position and somewhere else between the Vision Kerikeri position. I don't consider that their assertion of an extra 50 lots popping out of there, I don't think that's feasible or realistic. Maybe edging on the fanciful, but equally I acknowledge that the risk is not nil. So there's somewhere in the middle there, and that's why I sort of want to take a second look at that eastern side to see if I'm still comfortable with my original position.
Okay.
Yep. In terms of plan enabled capacity and Mr. Palmer, I just want to confirm that I did rely on the lot sizes and that information provided in his evidence and provided by Mr. Keogh in his evidence, and Mr. Palmer confirmed yesterday that those were indeed the correct figures. So I will go back and I will relook at how I use those figures to come to mind and see if I can figure out why the two differed, but I did rely on the information provided by Mr. Palmer's as my source of information. So I will try and get to the bottom of that for you. That aside, I also agree that planning enabled capacity is different from feasible capacity, and the likely subdivision yield of land is always influenced by a range of factors that reduce the actual number of lots getting created. But even if there were errors potentially in my calculations, I don't think that they are to the extent that the feasible yield for rezoning would equate to only 1 or 2 lots, which is what I heard from Mr. Palmer this week. It was maintained that there's a really clear difference between what a landowner intends to use their land for and what could actually be achieved from a subdivision perspective by another landowner, focusing on what they could get from maximum yield. And I feel like my recommendations to you need to focus on the latter scenario, not the landowner intentions for what they would do with that, as we know, if you get the zoning change.
So just to clarify, I was busy typing down while you were talking. It's always going too slow. Did you say that you didn't think there was much of a difference between plan enabled and feasible capacity in that property? Or do you want to do further investigation to see if there is?
At a high level, there is always a difference between plan enabled capacity and feasible capacity. There are always topographical constraints, particular things that play into it. So I acknowledge that the plan enabled capacity isn't probably what could pop out. My observation was that the evidence I heard from Mr. Palmer seemed to insinuate that if you focus on feasible capacity, what would probably pop out would only be 1 or 2 lots. And I don't agree that it drops from potentially 24 to 1 or 2. The difference, even taking into account potential errors and calculations and using different areas, it doesn't drop you down to just 1 or 2.
Okay. And you're going to confirm that you're right?
I'll confirm that in my right. And yes, I'll be focusing on what I actually think can be achieved numbers-wise on that side, not relying on the assertion of what the landowner says they're going to do with that land should they get that zone. Just a couple of comments on, we heard a lot this week about the rural residential zone and how hard it was working and performing lots of different functions. And a lot was made of it being a transition to an urban zone, and you heard everything from it's not an urban zone, it shouldn't be used for urban development, through to it's basically a given that it's going to become urban, and what does that mean? So I just want to be clear what my position is and what I think the rural residential zone does. It is a rural zone. It's not reticulated. It's not a future urban zone, and it does perform its own function. The comments about it being a zone in transition to urban, I don't think that should ever be viewed as that being a certain outcome. The wording in the overview is that it, this is my emphasis, may also be in a location where an urban area may grow and where land may be rezoned for urban development when demand requires it. So that sets up a whole chain of things that would have to click into place.
We're very much aware of those words, so thanks for highlighting those.
Yeah.
And the other thing too is it's in an overview. I did not see any of that reflected in any objective policy. Is that correct?
I was going to move on to that, yeah. So that statement is again in the overview, but there is a mention of future urban use at a policy framework level in RRZ 03. So when you look at RRZ 03, it says the function of the rural residential zone is to help meet the demand for growth around urban centres. But then it says, while ensuring the ability of the land to be rezoned for urban development in the future is not.
Yeah, okay. Well,
Yeah.
So it's a very big money.
It's a big money, and I think it means two things. From a consenting perspective, it's telling you, think about how you're designing things so that you're not shutting off your option for urban in the future. If it's ever got to a point where that's needed. But I think the other thing we can think of in terms of our rezoning question now is that you can consider whether it's appropriate to zone land rural residential if there's a possibility that it might be better used for general residential in the future, knowing that the inherent risk of using a rural residential zone to kind of be your future urban is that it's a live zone and people will subdivide it as they will within the parameters of that zone. So simply by being a live zone, allowing relatively small lots, that can compromise your choices in the future for urban. I'm jumping with that gun. That's probably all I'll say on that, unless there's any questions.
Yeah, I mean, these are things that we're going to explore next week as well, particularly when we have some economists in the room. So I'd get the opportunity to ask questions about economics to economists rather than planners.
Yes, definitely.
And obviously what you might have noticed in some of the questions we've been putting was that there's a rural strategy and an urban strategy. And somehow rural residential is forming, trying in the minds of a number of submitters, trying to perform a role for both. And certainly my view at this stage is that the rural residential zone is a rural zone still.
Yes, very much.
And if you're going to be pursuing an intensification strategy, there has to be some sort of constraint on rural residential land to encourage the outcomes of intensification to occur. I'm going to explore that with some of the economics experts.
Certainly, I would suggest not just the economic experts, but Mr. McElwraith, obviously, who undertook the HPA, will be able to tell you how capacity was arrived at. And
he's an economic expert.
Mr. Lindenberg.
Yes. Oh, Mr. Lindenberg.
And
Mr. Lindbergh, yes.
Mr. Lindenberg. So yes, touch on. So got very related evidence on. So you can get some clarity from those two.
Yeah, because look, I think I think it's a really important crossover between C and D, right? There's this role of rural residential, which I sort of look at as the smallest lot you can get without reticulation. Yeah, so there were some interesting questions that flowed on from a lot of our evidence that will go in next week as well.
It was one of the challenges of having hearings 15C and 15D split, because the number of conversations that I needed to have with the other representatives about the interrelatedness of my recommendations for rural residential, so that I'm not undermining their recommendations for some of their decisions about urban. The conversations were very interrelated. But if you're thinking about future questions from Mr. McElwraith next week, would like to get clarification on his behalf, but please interrogate him as the appropriate expert on this. But there were questions raised by Vision Kerikeri about sufficient capacity and of rural livestock and rural residential land. Mr. McElrath's memo, before he prepared the memos, both the rural one and the Kerikeri-Waipapa focused one, he turned to us in terms of what are your rezoning recommendations, or what should I be taking into account in terms of consented development that's already there that I should be considering as like, this is actually capacity that's already online. It's not new, it's already there. And one of the blocks of land that I made sure that Mr. McElrath knew about was House Farm, and double checking that when Mr. McElrath was thinking about what is the current capacity, what's the consented capacity that's already there, that was included. So when you heard statements from Vision Kerikeri about the upzoning and how that would bring on all of this extra capacity, that was already included. It's not a top up on Mr. McElrath's numbers. It formed part of his baseline, but please feel free to clarify that. That was my understanding.
Yes. Again, I think we're going to want to ask a number of questions of him, and in particular, it seems to me that there's a real delicate balance between providing enough rural residential land to satisfy your rural demand, particularly the constraints on the production zone, and not enabling oversupply, which undermines your intensification strategy. And that sounds to me like a really delicate balance.
It was the position. I think that's why we talked about that there is a real package of information, and it's what I opened with at the beginning of the week to say, when you think about what's already in front of you that's being recommended by the officers, it goes right back to what was notified in terms of upzoning. That forms part of the package, as well as the areas of greenfield zoning that Ms. Trind has recommended, as well as the Hearing 14 changes, the new more intensive zones, the loosening up of rules. They all work together, and so we're not doing it all eggs in one basket.
Yeah, and although a number of the submissions almost sort of forgot or didn't recognise that you have an area of greenfields in Waipapa and an area of greenfields in Kerikeri. I think it's what, 70-30 was the split, was it? 30% greenfield, 70% intensification. Was that how you were going to do something like that?
Yeah, we'll probably go into detail on the spatial plan with Mr. Rubin next week. I think there is a little bit of, I don't think there's a universal agreement on what greenfield might look like. So I think that might be a question for yourselves probably to ponder at a high level. We know that it's a lot. We have quite substantial existing greenfield reserves waiting to be developed in play. So that would probably be a very valid question. But I'll suggest that it actually probably requires a more than superficial kind of engagement in it.
And another question that I would be wanting to explore is, if you are a tier 3 local authority, how much plan-enabled capacity do you need to provide for? Is it 10, 20 or 30 years? Is it a different story for a tier 3 local authority than it is for a 1 and 2? Okay, thank you.
And so really the only thing I was going to finish with was Lachlan responding to what we've just heard today. And I don't want to go into a lot of detail because we heard a lot of detail today. I just wanted to clarify that with respect to the position of landowners to the west, that on that strip of lots that we're questioning what was the subdivision that just got approved for that. I have had email confirmation from those landowners that they are straddling the difficult, yes, that it's the RAZ area A is what it corresponds to. And they're straddling a difficult situation where they're not a further submitter. They don't have standing to appear at this hearing. They also are a neighbour of Mr. Sturgis, so it's I don't think they want to be directly opposed to this proposal. However, their clear preference that they have put in writing to me is that they would like to say rural production.
Because I've got their consent.
Yes,
Okay.
but it was, yes, they weren't quite sure how best to convey that to you without coming to the point of having to be here and oppose officially when they knew they didn't have something to do. So,
It seems to be one of the shortcomings of the proposal. They really don't have the support or the like of the united group of people that are actually out there. And you'd expect that to be the case rather than come along and say, well, there's two landowners here, we've included them, but we're not sure they're agreeing or not. We spoke to them, they seem to be reasonably happy. Seems to be a lot of a lot of flakiness in the whole thing, really. And I think that not having someone to actually lead the proposal, I mean, it's difficult when you've just got a raft of witnesses and it's dropped on somebody who's trying to coordinate it.
Well, it's hard as a planner to try and wear the running the hearing hat at the same time as being an expert witness yourself.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mr. Chair, you meant, at the very last question before they left was the issue of conferencing, and I appreciate that Mr. Langman offered if we'll have to conference. And the key issue for me, before saying yes, would love to jump in a room and hash things out, is scope of what we're actually conferencing on. Because while I have quite a long list of drafting concerns that you would get in a room and you would try and work on provisions and try and make policies better, try and get the rules tighter, there's a lot of work that I think would need to be done to get the chapter in shape. Again, it was a shortfall of not fully putting your best foot in June to give us the opportunity to actually have those conversations. But I don't think the issue of is the residential and the mixed use part of it or not, I really don't think that fundamental component of the development area has really been put forward to a point that I could support it in principle. Didn't get canvassed today as much as I thought it would in terms of questions, and one of the underlying issues is that wastewater. How would it be connected? Who would pay for it? I mean, clearly the actual upfront infrastructure costs, that doesn't seem to be in contention. Mr. Sturgis has offered it to pay for that. The issue is what happens afterwards. And my 42A report, based on my discussions with Mr. Hensley, is that it is not an asset that the council is in a position to take on in the long term in terms of the funding. I don't hear anything today from Mr. Hensley that sounded like he had changed his position on that. It sounds like he's open to working with them on design and making sure that it's fit for purpose, but there was no offer that I heard from Mr. Hensley saying, and council's willing to take it on as a public asset. I think Mr. Langman and I are both in agreement that the best outcome from an ownership perspective is that it not stay in private ownership in the long term. It's never, a body corporate situation for 120 lots plus a 1.4 hectare commercial area, that is really problematic. And I am going to be getting some information that I can include in my right of reply to really explain to you what my concerns are from a construction perspective on that model. And if you're not satisfied that that private model is the way to manage the asset going forward, then you are left back in the position that either council is happy to pay and take the asset on, and what I'm hearing is that there's no appetite for that or funding in the pot for that. So from my perspective, there isn't sufficient information to say that the urban component of the law proposal is resolved to the point that then I would be happy to get into a room and conference.
Yeah, and look, I put the question about economic analysis, and I thought you were going to go for either of those two zoning. You really needed to have an economic base there. The wastewater issues are also central to that, and I think we all know that council was reluctant to take on private. Mr. Henley probably didn't have the scope to even agree to it, even if he did. But we certainly know the history of private systems and council's approach to that.
It's challenging. So I guess if the panel were minded to direct me into expert conferencing, there may be a limit to how productive that could
be. Yeah, I'm mindful of what can be achieved in the time we have available. And I did think that there was possibly quite a bit of work to be done to bring the two groups together.
Well, even what could be achieved without a time constraint.
Yeah, there's some basic stuff, like the development area plan clearly needs updating. It was a spatial strategy, it was meant to be high level, it was put forward in the original evidence as such. There are bits that are blobby, there are labels that don't make a lot of sense and raise a lot of questions for us. So at the starting gate, you would have to really rework that plan and involve Ms. Absalom, Mrs. Morrison to peer review that and check that it still works from an ecological and landscape perspective. There's a lot of provisions that need tightening. I don't hear anything today that really resolved my concerns with the clustering subdivision. And there was no real discussion of how that mountain bike park, it sounds like that's the common area that they want to use to average areas to get their small lots, and who would manage that mountain bike park, who manages the, I guess sort of making the intention that it's not restoration or enhancement, it's ongoing management, yet the policy framework directs them to do restoration and enhancement. So there's a lot of things that just aren't connecting and adding up. I'm still very uncomfortable with the idea of the development plan preempting the consent process. I know Mr. Lang said, well, that potentially we could pull those out. You can say that the discretionary activity pathway takes course, but if you have a plan and a district plan telling you as a consent planner that these activities are forward-looking, you're not aware of the consequences of making calls, and you have to assume that the merits of that activity in principle were discussed here and agreed now that it was appropriate, and we have not done that.
Yeah.
So these are still all areas that I'm not resolved.
We understand those concerns too. The other thing too is that, this would be the first and possibly only development area in the plan. I'm interested to hear what you have to say about that, because, whilst it's possible, there are implications of that too. So
I think the distinction that Mr. Langham was really focusing on is because we have a plan, a master plan. I mean, it's been called a lot of things. It started out as a spatial plan, and then it's turned into sort of a master plan, and I think they're trying to wedge it into master plan because that's the word that was used in the original submission, the scope. I don't think the national planning standards or the guidance tell you that just because there's a plan or a map involved that you have to use a development area. When I looked at the two tools, the key distinction for me between the two was a precinct was looking at something that might need to be in place for a very long time to direct you in an ongoing manner as to how some of these things would need to be managed or resolved on site. A development area, in my view, and based on the guidance, is something that kind of comes in, serves a purpose, and then when the area is built out, you can walk away and let the zone rules work for themselves. This is almost like a hybrid of the two. There are some areas where Mr. Langham's proposing to rely on the underlying zones, and maybe for the rural lifestyle, you could walk away once it's built out. Some of the other things and the policy direction in particular as to how that's going to be managed long term, I think that needs to stay long term, which doesn't match with the development area default. So you could probably make an argument either way, either of them, but I still maintain it for example.
Can I just make a comment really, or it might tidy up the sewerage aspect of it. I never said much during today's. From the council's perspective, we actually have an obligation to maintain the existing plants until the takeover by local board is done well, which I think is 2027.
Yeah.
So other than maintenance, I don't think we'll be doing much at all. Simply can't afford it. That's the basics of it. Mr. Sturgis gave a very good explanation of what's wrong with the pond. Should have been lined to start with, and some it cracks, and we get a bit of leakage out, and it goes down into the ecological area. So I think from that point of view, there's, unless it's completely private, there will be no move, and then it'll be into the local water, the combined CCO across the councils, and their priorities of what will happen come into play then. As far as, what was the other thing I was going to say? I was confused by their whole mountain bike park and things like that, and the management of a number of the areas. And if you go to a place like Rotorua and the mountain bike tracks through the redwoods or Waitangi, again, there's a lot of people who use Redwoods and go further south, it's the same thing. I don't think the numbers will be there unless it's summertime. Great concept, but I'm not sure how that will work. But that's about all I've got to say on it, but more about the infrastructure.
Sorry. Yeah, no, and with the mountain bike park, I think it's proposed would be included as rural lifestyle zone, as its underlying thing is another area of risk. Because if that isn't pursued as an activity, then you just have rural lifestyle zone. And somehow then there would be the opportunity to rework that in a different way that doesn't look like mountain bike park. And it then gets quite uncertain as to how that heathland and that Manukakanga gets managed. So I think if they weren't relying on it to get yield for their cluster subdivision idea, it would have been made more sense to have that land put into rural production zone, not rural lifestyle zone. If that was genuinely the intention to keep it mountain bike park.
What I wouldn't mind you confirming in your right of reply is setting aside the residential and commercial zone, how those activities that they propose could be established under the rural production zone provision.
So just to clarify, including the areas that are actually sitting in the rural lifestyle bit as put forward, like the mountain bike park and the
Yes, I'm talking about the activities, not the subdivision.
not the sub. Okay, so just anything on
Setting
there.
aside the urban.
Yeah.
Could be activities, lamping, education centre, mountain bike park, that's that.
Education centre,
Yeah.
quite a list.
Yeah, and all the accommodation things, how would they fall under the rural production zone? Activities, and how enabling is the rural production zone for those activities if they didn't have a development area?
And there's the overlays as well, isn't there?
Yeah, the overlays would play a role, I suspect, and
some.
Yeah.
I think that was one of the other concerns that actually didn't come out today from
I was going to ask the applicant that question, but I thought you'd be able to answer it better.
Yeah, there's a concern that their targeted rules apply to buildings. Talk about structures, and I mean, so someone wants to talk to this more, but it was a concern she raised with me.
What are the activities and buildings? I mean, because my general perception is, I had a bit of a look at that, right of reply, hearing 9 provisions, that a lot of these activities you can establish in the production zone.
Probably not the mountain bike park or the lifestyle zone.
Yeah, but if you take those out, if there's another path for consent to those, you're left with a small triangular area of general residential that they're seeking by way of a special development.
The idea of a mountain bike park in a rural production zone isn't outrageous.
No.
Particularly if it's not being farmed or it's not highly productive land. It's where you tend to sort of put mountain bike parks on.
Yeah. It's yeah, no, I can look at that, and it would feed into my.
I think we'd be interested in that in terms of. Let's ask a question.
So the area that's mixed use and general residential zone. So the question about, I mean, I know that they apply to those zones, but my question was about, instead of those zones, rural lifestyle zone, like more of a rural non-articulated zone. We heard from the submitters that they weren't opposed to lifestyle in the locality, but they didn't apply for that. Do you have any response about that?
I have put a sort of similar question to the platform submitters as part of the pre-hearing meetings to say, what's the driver for the urban? Why does it need to be urban? Why does it need to be reticulated? And the response that I got was that the extent of the ecological enhancement that's required, combined with the other sorts of activities, basically, if you don't have the urban, you'll never get the commercial return to make any of the other stuff happen. So it's part of the package deal. You either say yes to our urban, or you lose all the opportunity for all the other nice stuff that we might do. So there wasn't any appetite in those initial discussions for them to consider pivoting away from the urban component of their proposal for It sounds like from Mr. Sturgis's perspective, if that's not on the table and you can't get any urban yield, you don't get any of it.
So it didn't, there
So
was
we're back to
no,
wastewater.
so there was no talk of staging to lifestyle while the other areas were looked at more confirmation. No.
No, it was the urban zoning is critical to the commercial, the ability to pull off any of the other stuff from a commercial perspective. Not going to be able to fund the wastewater treatment plant, you don't give us the urban, not going to be able to do the ecological restoration without the urban. It was very much a symbiotic relationship. It was the whole development area needs to work to actually happen, and that includes the urban. So there was no interest in just pivoting back to rural lifestyle. That's my impression anyway from the engagement I've had today.
Okay, right, we'll move on, flights to catch and etc.
Yes, that was all my answer.
Right, thank you very much.
And well done.
Yeah, well done. I normally say the 43 reports for this hearing have been exceptional, and we're really grateful for the huge amount of effort you've all put in. It's incredible. We haven't, I look at it and I think, my God, it's an mountain to read, but my God, it's really well put together. It's been of great assistance. So.
Appreciate it.
Anyone suffering insomnia, I can recommend it. No, it's been.
Okay, now let's discuss it.
So we'll first go to Ken Lewis Limited, the site on Kaitaia. So the panel directed some questions to the submitter around staging of that development. Want to, yeah, we will consider that further, but we've heard from the panel.
Well, we're not going to require you to engage in intensive analysis of the flooding areas. I think what's occurred to us is it's a little bit cart before the horse in the sense that their economics expert said, oh, there's a lot of land there that can't be developed because that's subject to flooding. But we don't know what and how much. And I don't think it's actually reasonable for that submitter to do that work. It probably needs to be done with the local authority because it's the land that the council's owned. And it seems to me that it would flow out of that analysis that you would then say, well, we need other land to be developed. So,
Fortunately, sir.
this has been done.
That work is on our immediate radar. Like that's exactly the sort of
spatial plan thing.
district-wide spatial plan, right? So they'll get another bite through in time, but that I think is due. It's again for another fast-paced piece of work that we're looking to complete. So it's not throw the baby out with the bath water. And as you said, there are some. We recognise there is potentially significant merit. Probably does need a little bit more finesse and also a little bit of detail, particularly around stormwater and flooding issues around the network management. But I think, yeah, it's something that we realise that it could be merit.
Yeah, that'd be helpful to put in the right reply and say there could be maybe another process. Okay, that's cool.
And also
We're going to try and visit that property after Lucklaw if we get the opportunity. But
Yeah, we'll get there.
Phil Marshall has spoken.
yeah, I just wanted to also update the panel that council is going to be available next week, and he did address the reduction.
So council's economist is going to be addressing some of the stuff in C as well as D. Yeah.
Yes, he has actually already prepared a statement around it. Yeah, you can hear that.
We'll need to allocate extra time for that, which is good. Thanks.
For the in Lewis Limited, I also brought up about the existing infrastructure projects were currently being delivered, and I wasn't sure if those addressed any of those concerns. So the stormwater overland flow path matter, because I know that there's also the sewage on Donald Road, so there's major infrastructure upgrades that are happening currently in that locality.
So I think we've largely addressed one, which I think is the wastewater, which is something that's not good to go. It seems to me like even if the works were complete on stormwater, there's a missing step around modelling, about understanding the impact of new areas on any upgrades anyway. So there is a little bit of a missing piece. That's probably one of the key pieces that we've been in. So I think that the gap needs to be filled.
We did get some advice from Mr. Hensley around the timing of that infrastructure as
Yeah.
well. So we can provide that.
Thank you.
May I ask a question, Chair? Probably for Melissa and Sarah. Earlier on, Melissa, you said something around the timing or I'll just ask the question. Timing of the zone change is limiting or eliminating further opportunity for compact urban form. So whether it's infrastructure holding it up. So, and there's a couple of sites we've been looking at that, you know, is the timing correct? They might be eliminating what could really happen on that site. I think we discussed that briefly in a little drive around yesterday, but I'm not sure I've couched that question correctly, but do you understand what I mean? What are we eliminating if we go, yeah, do that?
I think from my perspective, obviously I'm dealing with requests for rural residential. So you're hearing a lot of messaging about
Future,
you've got to provide the growth now, you know, this is a pathway to do it without having to articulate. It's easy, it's low cost of council, just go ahead, more affordable. And in some cases where you genuinely want to provide more capacity in that, if you thought you had there's a need for more actual rural residential capacity because you needed more rural residential product, not because you just needed a cheap way to get extra housing. I think those are two very different scenarios in front of you. And yes, there may be areas, I don't think any of them necessarily are ones that I was looking at where its best advice use would be general residential right now if the servicing happened to stack up. But just in principle, it's always something I think should be considered to say, are we jumping the gun with a rural?
so then we flip immediately to Sarah's what we're talking about now.
Yeah.
Which is the general res.
You know, we've got our council economist reports around capacity. I think that's where that timing thing comes in. Projected out to the next sort of 30 years. It's not looking like we need additional.
Because one of the points the chair put to the submitters yesterday was staging.
There is an opportunity, but I don't think it's something that's
Been
really.
offered. Yeah, that's why I'm conscious of the time we have before us to potentially resolve those issues. TikTok.
Okay.
No, not TikTok to you.
A little bit.
TikTok to the submitter.
Yeah.
Very conscious at the 8th of November, last day. Oh yeah, what time do you need to be at the airport?
And about an hour, Chair.
Right, let's wrap it.
Ideally, we can buy-
Sorry, Mr. Chair, I know
We've got 45 minutes, I'll drive it.
Only need 30 minutes.
Okay, so moving on, we heard from Ngāti Hine representatives this morning. So I think we're going to meet with them and present a position back to the panel on the rezoning that such before December, at the end of December. So shortly. Some of the other submitters we heard from, Mr. Ludland, in relation to the Coopers Beach Retirement Village, rezoning to general residential. Well, there is a land use consent for the 3 stages of development. General res zoning without titles could allow other type of development, potentially not retirement in the sector. So we'd need to carefully consider infrastructure in that location as well. I can go away and provide a further response around that. In regards to the Adipara request, I maintain my position on that one.
Obviously, the key issue is the rural, the RPROS zone. When you look at and Mr. Trundle will provide this, the access way to that road is covered by a number of hazards quite a way along the road.
Sorry, that's something. We're coming
Is it another part of one?
coming to that.
Okay. James.
So the other prior one, per Ladner, was a very street, which had stage 1 and stage 2. Stage 2, was consent was granted. Stage 1 was still maintaining my position.
We're talking about the Parkington one.
Yeah, we're getting to that.
It seemed to be quite a logical planning decision. You approved like stage 2 and you turned down stage 1. Not you guys.
Very good decision from somebody, Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
So I primarily understood the concerns.
I'll let you go, please. Sorry.
Yeah, I'd have to explain it to Steve.
Okay, moving on to Farah Way, Adifara. I just wanted to clarify that it sounded like the subdivision was split zoned. It was probably just a legacy. That portion of the site was already had residential, general residential zone. And then the top half was a rural reduction. So we can get to the bottom of that, but that's likely the situation. I will obtain a copy of the resource consent and just check if there's any land use components to that consent as well. And while there may be limited subdivision opportunities, zoning that land general residential could open up some further land use opportunities. So there could be mining units and further res intensity on the site. So I need to have a look into that, confirm my position around that. But in saying that, we could look to amend our recommendation with maybe some restrictions around further development of those sites as well. So I would provide a response to that. But yeah, my primary concerns that what James was talking through there was the access site to those properties being subject to coastal erosion and flood hazard as well. So that was my primary concern there when I was looking at those sites. Anything on that one?
Isn't the bottom part of it that is zone residential also subject to that hazard?
Correct.
I think
It's a
the
legacy
key,
thing,
the key
so-
point is perhaps not exposing or restricting access to additional development. Right.
Which side are we on there again? Just that's Adifara or you? Oh, yeah, got it. Because the other one that's similar is Reef Lodge Hotel, Gillies, which we might have a chance to look at tomorrow.
It's just down the road from Blackpool.
All right, so we heard from Mr. Putt in regards to Cavalli properties. We resolved some of the rezoning issues there, but he actually mentioned in his rebuttal evidence around zoning for stage 2 of that development. He didn't clarify that exactly when he was here on Thursday, but I feel like we need to investigate the zoning of stage 2 a little bit further, and I'll provide consideration of that. And that just leaves Mr. Kemp, and he talked to some points that you're going to hear about next week in 15D, so I'll reserve some comment on those till next week.
Yeah, the thing that worries me about Mr. Kemp's evidence is I tried to give him the opportunity to clarify. Got a bit upset, but he's representing his own property and then giving and saying he's complying by the code of conduct. I'm struggling to see how you can do that. Any response from council officers on that?
I think we'll let that one lie on the table, Mr. Chair.
That was my conclusion.
Yeah, look, he covered a lot of matters, some of it within his area of expertise. But you're right, we'll be covering a lot of these matters next week as well. Is he going to be appearing again?
I don't believe so.
I think we gave all of the submitters that had crossover issues between C and D the opportunity to choose which hearing they would be at. Mr. Kemp's chosen this one. Audrey Campbell-Freer, for example, is chosen next week.
Yeah, good, yes, okay. Good.
So you would talk about Waitotara Drive next week?
No, Waitotara Drive, all of the submitters that are interested in Waitotara Drive spoke this week.
Yeah.
I'm happy to answer any questions on Waitotara Drive.
And it's a rural zone they're seeking anyway, so.
They are, they're seeking rural
Probably
extension.
this hearing,
Is it about more condensed subdivision opportunity?
Very much so.
It seemed to me a lot of these submitters were looking at roads and things being defensive. Natural features. We're just in response to that.
I mean, what is,
The same, McCorn was the same, really.
Yeah.
Waitotara Drive, being really honest, my primary reason for not, well, there's two of them. The first one was the sort of general principle approach I took for request for rural residential on the edges of Kerikeri-Waipapa, which is based on the economic evidence that it's no more zoning is necessary. So that's sort of the first part of it. And the second part of it was I was not given any expert evidence on flooding to put to any other expert to confirm whether the Waipapa zone flooding was resolved or not. There was anecdotal evidence provided. There was assertions that previous resource consents had been provided, but no further evidence. No expert evidence, which is why I didn't engage a specific flooding peer review because I had nothing to review.
So, Mr. Chair, we have NRC next week.
Yes.
I think we've got evidence online as well. And conversations around the natural hazard chapter. Again, this is for you to perhaps inquire with NRC, is that the works that were undertaken in that area were primarily aimed at ameliorating the 1 in 10 year hazard as opposed to the 1 in 50. It's not to say there might not be some kind of effect on that, but primarily the focus wasn't on.
And their land wasn't the primary focus of the works.
Perhaps, yes, that might be my recollection, but they'll certainly be able to give you an outline.
Yeah, okay. No, thank you. We need to get people in the air. Thank you very, very much. This has been a long, and quite an intense hearing. So I think we've all handled it quite well. We need to take a nice.
You've done that. All done.
Yep. We need to take a nice week break and let's all do it again next week. Oh, except you. I'll see you.
I will be calling in.
We'll be seeing you again though, won't we, Mr. And Jerome. And Malay.
We've been seeing a lot of people.
Never a shot.
We've been seeing a lot of people. Actually, on that, Mr. Chair, it is probably opportune to last person hearing that we'll have with Ms. Pearson and
Oh, this is your field one.
in person, and unfortunately, I don't think she'll be there hearing 17 at the end. So I guess this is my opportunity to publicly thank her for her diligent efforts, her expertise, and her skill and input into this process. I think it's been quite a hefty input into the process, and certainly provided considerable value for her. So thank you.
Yep. Round of applause. Yeah, let's go away. No, thank you, Ms. Pearson. Yeah, you've really made our jobs a lot easier. It's hard in the sense that we've got to read a lot, and it's all been very, very well. Yeah.
I do like my word count.
Yeah. So,
Are you getting paid on Word?
Just to make everyone's job easier on the day.
So we hope to see you again, and otherwise, good luck for Kaipara, and have a safe trip home.
Will do. We're closing out.
And we're now going to close with a Kerikeri by Janine.
Thought I may as well close out my last
Is this
one.
going to be singing or?
Kerikeri rather than Waipapa today. Tell me. Good, but I want. Marama. Takiri mai ko te ata, ko rihi mai ko te manu, manu korori, e manu korora, e kororo no tua whakarere, no mai I te ao, haere ake ko te po. Tihe Māori. Stop it, we are recording.